Hello friends, and welcome to the newest episode of the Road to Elite vlogging series. This week we have week 4 of my training in this cycle. We're going to be looking at a little bit different rep range than what we've seen in the previous 3 weeks. This is where the program starts to take off, move more towards peaking for singles. So this first day we had deadlifts. It's going to take a little bit of explaining here, but I think it's really worth it because this with deadlifts is the area that I have tailored the most for my personal needs and preferences as to anything else in the program. So the whole reason why I'm doing this Road to Elite series is not necessarily intended directly as an informative series. It's more learning for you all by example while I myself am putting in the effort to learn along the way. This is an opportunity for me to reflect on the decisions that I made, the things that I anticipated and expected in my training, and then the reality that actually occurred. Kind of comparing those and saying, how can I optimize for the future? So I'm just hoping to lead by example in that. This is the kind of intricacy I try to implement into my training, of looking at my own training, and it's kind of what it takes in order to optimize your training. So starting off with deadlifts, we have a situation where I am making excellent progress in my overall power, explosivity on the movement, and just general strength. How much weight I can move in total has definitely gone up. What has not gone up and continues to be a thorn in my side is the amount of volume that I can sustain in a workout on deadlifts before I get lower back inflammation. This is a giant pain for me because I, in general, benefit from higher volume. Absolutely do on bench press, 1,000,000%, and on squats. I think I would with deadlifts too if I weren't dealing with such loads of inflammation, but that's kind of the name of the beast. I'm not the only person who has that discrepancy when it comes to deadlifts. That's not an uncommon thing from what I've found in the literature regarding strength training. It seems to have a more profound effect on the CNS as a whole. Perhaps something due to the involvement of the grip in the hands, which is a literal network of nerves, nerve bundles that when they get inflamed and bothered kind of affects you holistically. Exact same thing with the lower back. It's such a integral part of your nervous system that when it experiences that extra inflammation and that pain, kind of sends some negative feedback through your nervous system. I'm not one to go along and overvalue saying everything when something goes wrong is due to your CNS being out of whack or something, but I think these little triggers definitely contribute to a longer recovery time. So just something I consider and factor in with deadlifts. I would like to be doing more volume, but right now it doesn't seem to be very feasible for me. So I'm trying to make the most out of the opportunities I have. Right now, in week 4, we have entered the phase of 5s. I'm using kind of a 5x5 model. It's really more like a 4x5 model actually, as we'll see throughout the week, but kind of using about a 4x5 model of sets and rep schemes. Close to, very close to, and a little bit over in some cases, 80%, 80 to 85% I would say is of my 1 rep maxes is about where we're residing here. Now with deadlifts, and with a couple of other things this week, I have to talk about what EM is here. Underneath the first line of deadlift, we have a 1x1. On EM, for me, that means an everyday max. Really, truthfully, you can kind of trace that origin back to something that's a little bit west side and the conjugate method, which involves doing a maximum effort work every week. They wouldn't necessarily choose a weight load that was exactly 100% of their rep max, usually around the 95 to 100%. And if you can get that second rep in there on 95%, all the better. It just shows that you've grown. Yada yada. Well, my point in referencing that is that I'm looking for that number. It's not at 100%, but it's not as low as 90%, something that I use for triples usually. I'm capable of doing 3x3 on about 90% with relative consistency. That's a staple part of my program as I peak. What previously has not been a stable part of my program has been getting those every week singles in there. And when it comes to powerlifting, isn't that exactly what we're looking to do in the long run? We're looking to have increased strength in these single rep ranges. You practice what you get, you know? The things that you practice are going to be the outcome that you can expect. Now, that's not saying, of course, that I'm recommending you do only singles. Obviously, I'm not doing only singles my entire cycle along with accessory work. Definitely, there is a linear progression where the number of reps is going down and the weight is going up. Absolutely. But I think there's a little room for being aware of our final objective, even in the process. The reason why the volume and intensity opposite relationship exists is because we have to be aware of mounting fatigue. If these singles are accomplished week in and week out and make up the crux of the volume and the workload that's being accomplished, it's going to ultimately wear you down in your joints and nervous system, lots of factors, if you're the average person. I want to start practicing heavier weight loads. Right now, in week 4, we are 6 weeks out from peaking. I don't want to go an entire 9 weeks of never doing a single and then put all of my effort and all of my thought into, all right, how well is this single going to go? So I've adapted into my training program with this Road to Elite idea, doing an everyday max, somewhere around 95%. In this case, 555 pounds is about 95% of my current rep max that I've achieved at 585 pounds. So this will be used for this week, week 5, week 6, and maybe even week 7 as well. That one I leave up to how my nervous system feels. But I want a solid couple of weeks dealing with this same weight for the single rep on bench, squat, and deadlift. We'll see all 3 of those utilize this idea. I want that to be an overarching theme so that I am able to see it improve. If I see it not improving, if I see in fact the opposite especially, if I see this become more difficult, a higher RPE number, rate of perceived exertion, goes up, I know that I'm not doing myself a service by keeping this in here. Or also I could look at it and say that means I'm doing too much overall work if I'm getting weaker on something that I'm training to get stronger on. Now, I did this 555 everyday max on this past Monday, and it has never moved faster. No question that 555 was very much in my control. It felt good to accomplish. Absolutely. That already in and of itself showed to me that the 3 previous weeks in which I did not do any singles, did not do anything above 80% of my 1 rep max even, it was all higher rep ranges, mostly hypertrophic work. I felt very fresh. I felt very capable of accomplishing this task. So the weight flew up quite easily. And then hit another awesome thing. After about a 4-minute rest period, I went to 5 reps at 495. That's another something I have never been able to accomplish with it feeling so easy. 100%. So as far as RPE's requirements, this was probably like an 8.5. You know, I would definitely say it was below an RPE of 9. I feel like I could have pulled it for a double. Then the 5 reps at 495, probably about an RPE of 8.5 to 9. get another rep in the tank if I so needed to. But that was what my goal was. I had preset those two things as my expectations for myself on that training day. So a little bit of a step back here for a moment. I have two expectations for the deadlift now. One is to continue to get stronger on the hip hinge. Pulling around shin level is the slowest part of the movement for me. If I can get it up past the shins, almost to the knees, it's going to skyrocket the rest of the way. I know that about myself at this point. So most of my focus is on doing things that are in that depth range. That's why I was doing pause deadlifts right around that range in my hypertrophic weeks. It's why on Friday of this week you will see I'm doing deficit deadlifts as a complementary movement to my deadlifts. Just spends more time deeper in the hole. It's better for me. So that's one thing that I'm focused on. And in those instances, I'm using straps right now so that I can be double overhand, get really deep into the hole, continuing to work on the explosivity and just everything I need in regards to deadlifting. Duh. What's holding me back is my grip. Now, I could meet myself where I'm at with my grip with all of my deadlift training. The problem is there's such a discrepancy right now between what my hands can achieve as far as holding onto the bar for weight loads and what my actual explosive working muscle groups are capable of achieving, that I would be shooting myself in the foot to do so. Not only would I be hurting my deadlift in the long run, probably would be hurting my squat too because of the benefits that the deadlift have in explosivity on those shared muscle groups between the squat and the deadlift. So I have taken to kind of dividing my deadlift training up a little bit. What we just saw were two exhibitions of strength in a situation where I'm strong, strapped in, double overhand, able to engage the lats really well like that, get deep into the hole, and not worry about my grip slipping, right? So these are pure exhibitions of strength. In the warming up, I go from a double overhand without straps for as long as I possibly can. Right now that brings me up to 365, having a hard time holding on to 405 with double overhand, no straps right now. So right around 365 it starts to drop off where I have to switch to an under over, which I really hate. I really do not like under over whatsoever. It's how I initially, it was how I was deadlifting when I initially twinged my back. So I am hesitant to use it. I find that imbalance to put the imbalance between the hands traveling through to my back. Oftentimes it feels like I have a little bit of a twist going on. And that it's just not conducive to being my strongest or my safest in doing so. Anyways, my attempt in warming up to the 555 everyday max was a over-underhanded 5 plates 495, which I was not able to achieve. It was close, but I was not able to achieve it at that time. So I have a discrepancy of 90 pounds, maybe even 100 pounds, realistically, between what I can grip and what I can actually pull. We're going to be doing some major work to change that, no question. So, super long conversation on deadlifts there, but they're so pivotal to why I'm doing my program the way that I am, and there's a lot of customization that I've done to make them more optimal for me. Moving on. So we did the over-under, failed attempt, 495. I just said, screw it, let's go straight up, everyday max, get it done. Felt really good on it, came back down to 495, dropping even further down, another 3 to 4 minute rest period between, went to 2 sets of 5 at 405 without straps. That was an over-under. I think those were beltless too, actually, because the weight was light enough. The belt really wasn't a factor. And I'll make mention about that in the next exercise too. But did that with no straps, got it pretty solidly. So I know that my comfort zone for holding weights is in the upper 400s, whereas I'd like it to be in the upper 500s. We'll get there. But doing some work that was less focused on what I can actually pull and more focused on meeting my hands where they're at right now. So that was deadlifting. Rack squats. This is a new addition as well in my program, presently speaking. I have previously done low box squats. So the traditional box squat is, at parallel or pretty close to parallel. These I was using a low enough box. It was probably 2 to 3 inches below what parallel would be. So a deep squat was my intention there. Doing it as an accessory, a complementary movement to squats, but not on the day when I do my primary squatting. That's how I like to do it. Deadlift, and then some harder variation of the squat. On squat day, do my regular squats, a harder variation of the deadlift. So that's what's going on here. Rack squats, in this instance, I had the racks, the pins set right as close to parallel as possible. I took just a little bit more of a high bar than what I would normally take. I'm definitely a low bar squatter. So a little bit higher bar got me a little more upright, just made the movement a little bit more challenging. Doing that beltless, I like to do those harder variations because they're intended to make the situation harder anyways. I'm not looking to move massive amounts of weight. I'm not trying to do like a high rack squat where, okay, it might not be full range of motion, but let's work on that, squat lockout and just throw some heavy weights around. Not my intention. My intention is to manipulate the movements to make them more difficult than what I'm actually going to be doing them as in competition, so that I'm completely and utterly prepared for worst case scenarios, and it trains out my weaknesses, right? So doing that, doing high bar without a belt and pausing, 3 things that make the movement more difficult, did make the weight load comparatively a good deal lower. 315 is probably closer to like 60-65% of my low bar true 1 rep max squat. So a lower percentile as far as what it's going to require of my quads and glutes to accomplish this, but what it was requiring of my lower back, my abs, and then the pause where I kill any kind of stretch reflex, any kind of momentum, all factors that made that weight feel like a whole lot more than it was. So that was very successful. I really liked doing the rack squats. The reason I moved away from low box squats and exchanged them to these rack squats is that I was finding that the reinitiation, once the pause had been initiated and the stretch reflex is foregone, getting out of the box, I was taking a different shape, a different pathway than I would actually take on a true, free weight, just no supportive material squat. So the carryover was not as optimal as I would like it to be. With a rack squat, I'm falling into the exact position that I would fall into if I were just doing a regular high bar squat. So way, way better carryover and relevancy. So that's super solid. Finally, the third movement was rack deadlifts, double overhand grip. I had been previously doing a couple of different variations on grip work, direct grip work. One being by the powerlifting legend Ed Cohn's suggestion, where you take a sideways stance to the bar, picking it up in one hand, supporting with the other side. Works the abs, obliques, because you're carrying a unilateral load, and works that one grip at a time, right? Then you just switch over to the other side, do like 15, 30-second holds, moderately heavy weights. I liked them, I did, but the carryover, again, is not optimal. And everything I'm doing with this cycle is all about trying to have optimal carryovers to my real lifts, right? So I don't deadlift like I'm carrying 2 suitcases. I deadlift like I've got a bar in front of my body. So my grip work is more reflectory now of I've got a bar in front of my body. We're doing these rack deadlifts. The rack deadlift part doesn't really matter all that much to me. I just found it was more challenging for my grip if I were actually going from a deadlift stance, at least halfway down into a deadlift stance and coming up and doing that motion, doing a hold in between, instead of just stand up, shrug the weight, and hold it, because it ends up holding against my quads a little bit at the top there. So inevitably I end up helping my grip a little bit, whereas in the bottom of a deadlift, there is no help. You know, you're close to your shins, but if anything, that friction is pulling in the weight out of your hands instead of helping it to stay in your hands. So I wanted to make the situation as realistically difficult as the practical application I need it to be at. Double overhand, because I'm still hoping that I can find a mastery of the hook grip. I really don't like doing under over. I'm trying to find a situation that I can feasibly hold a heck of a lot of weight with a double overhand grip. So I'm going to keep training my double overhand grip. And it's just plain the harder variation all the way around. Even if I have to do under over, the training of double over grip absolutely contributes and carries over to that. So that was the first day. That was a healthy, it was a long discourse to get through that, but it's a super, super important and very specialized workout. So for the next one, we're going to be moving on to press day. All right, and then we had training day number 2, press day. Moving right into it. Close grip bench press. Continuing with my everyday max philosophy of wanting to get in those events of heavy singles, not truly maximal singles, but something I can reliably and predictably accomplish in the everyday training. So for me, with close grip bench press, that's 405. I think I've done a very difficult triple with 405 on close grip before. So I know that a single there is a pretty realistic expectation on the regular for me. And it was. It went up super duper easy, really accelerated well. Realistically, probably could have gone with 415 or 420 there, but wanted to stay on the conservative side as I didn't have a spot for this particular training session. So moving on, took about 3-4 minutes of rest. Hit a 5 rep with 375 at a RPE of about 10. That was an effort for sure. And again, being without a spot, I wasn't willing to, really push things too far. Again, the weight, I probably could have gone up a little bit higher if I were assisted with, a spotter present and available. I would feel more confident to go higher there. But that was about an RPE of 9 to 10. And then backed off in the weight just by 20 pounds, set the standard there, and did 3 sets of 5s with 355, moving pretty good acceleration there, most certainly. So very pleased with that outcome on close grip bench press. 5 reps for 375 is tied for the best I've been able to accomplish with that movement previously. So keeping on par and moving ahead in a couple of other aspects is always a great thing. Military press, these I truly did do from the ground, pulled up into a rack position. Trying to find the optimal width for me on these. These have proven a very fickle exercise for me, where the relationship between my triceps and my anterior deltoid and what my preference, my body's preferential angle is between them seems to fluctuate a little bit depending on, I guess, what's sore, what's been used more, aspects like that. When I pull it from the floor, as opposed to taking it out of a rack, that seems to set me in a better place 9 times out of 10. So even though I'm not a weightlifter, I'm not doing those Olympic events of a clean. In this case, I am, in order to set myself up for the movement, doing some cleans in there. And that's certainly, at 195, a light enough weight where that's no difficulty getting it up into a clean position. But once that was set with realistically about thumb length and a little bit more, about an inch more from the inner knurling, the start of the knurling, that seems to be a pretty good pocket where I'm still getting a nice depth all the way deep into the bottom position where I rack pretty close to my clavicle, but it's also primarily a shoulder movement. I'm not putting too much emphasis on the triceps. And I say that because my triceps are naturally strong and I've put a lot of work into growing them. As of late, my shoulders are a little bit lagging out of the trio of pressing muscles. I need more work on my shoulders, so where I can make that a more shoulder-dominated movement, I'm going to do so for right now. So that went quite well. Moved directly into another shoulder pressing movement. Don't usually like to do that, where I do two primary muscle group movements back to back like that for the sake of recovery. But the dumbbell overhead presses are so much easier than the military press that not only was I able to go up in weight to 210 pounds with the two combined 105-pound dumbbells, but I was also able to accomplish almost twice as many reps as I was doing with the 195 in the military press position. I think for the most part it has to do with range of motion. I'm only bringing the dumbbells, which are rather large circumference-wise, so I'm really only able to bring them about to mid-head level, maybe nose level, and then pressing back up and together at the top, right? As you'd expect with a dumbbell press. With the military press, I am definitely lower than that. I'm allowing there to be, at the bottom, sometimes even making contact with the clavicle region. So definitely a diminished range of motion means I can use more weight for sure. Do love how these feel. These are definitely contributing to getting rid of that lagging shoulder syndrome that I've got going on. Moving right on to the last movement, had skull crushers there. Given that the triceps had contributed to all three previous relatively heavy compound movements, I opted to go with a lighter weight. 80 pounds is quite light for me on skulls, and just do some extra reps in there. So 3 sets of 12 kind of dealio, short rest periods. Get it in, get it done. Left with a really good burn. A very successful press day. Had some great instances of strength towards the top of it. Held my ground in the 5s range for the military press. And then the last two movements brought home the work on my shoulders and triceps. So, very effective. Next, we'll be moving on to my back day. Moving right along into my pull day. The first comment worth making here is that these 3 consecutive training days happened on 3 consecutive days now. I have moved my pull day away, remove it away from my squat day so that I no longer do Thursday back and Friday squats. I now do Wednesday back, Thursday rest, Friday squats. Allows a greater chance for recovery of my lower back and just back in general, which plays such an integral part in squats form. And I have already found that that is definitely a helpful improvement to my squats. Well worth doing. The only downside, inevitably, is that I go from deadlifting on a Monday to pressing on a Tuesday, which generally doesn't relate as much to the pulling muscles other than stabilization. But when it comes to those military presses, there's definitely some back involvement. I like to wear my really good belt on those military presses to eliminate as much of the lower back discomfort and mounting inflammation as possible. But it's inevitable. There's going to be contribution of those back muscles when it comes to that press day. So then I move into pull day, usually with not a compromised back by any means, but with some level of soreness here or there in my lower back, lat region. And that's okay. The back needs to be resilient. It needs to be able to continue to do good work, good stabilizing work, even in a fatigued state. So I'm not opposed to that, and I'm not looking for the world record in bent over rows right now. I'm looking at bent over rows as its application to deadlifts. That's my focus point for them right now. So with that caveat aside, still put up some pretty good numbers in this regard. These bent over rows are always accomplished without straps and beltless. I like to train my bent over rows without the help of a belt. Just gets more involvement from the spinal erectors, and especially more involvement from the abs, which is one of the core reasons I continue to do bent over rows as a corrective measure against my previous back injury issues. It definitely has the potential to aggravate those previous injuries. That happens sometimes. Absolutely does. However, the pros of doing them absolutely outweigh the cons. Because with my injuries, I have found the worst thing I could possibly do is put myself in an environment where I'm not getting the training load and the volume that I actually need on my back so that it can grow stronger, more resilient, and protect itself better. As opposed to just avoid the things that cause any kind of pain or discomfort. Yes, I am not pursuing pain when it comes to my training. 100%, I'm not looking to do bent over rows and, oh, it hurts, my back's so good. No, I definitely wanted to promote better blood flow, positive, strong contractions, but not looking for pain. I get a lot of inflammation from them, I do. And that's why I ended up lowering the weight in this instance. It wasn't that my grip wasn't holding 275 successfully. I was finding that the depth to which I've been going is kind of an aggravating factor to an unnecessary degree. Now, this is an opportunity for optimization right here. I'm not going to stop doing bent over rows. I love what they do for my back, especially in the 5 rep ranges. It's that perfect balance between being a hypertrophic range and being a strength range. Just fits nicely for what my back needs. So I've been putting down on the floor a couple of 25s, one on each side, and then pulling from that position. Gives me about, an inch off the floor kind of deal. On this day, I went with 2 25s on each side to give me about 2 inches up off the floor. Now, a bent over row in and of itself is not a requirement that you start from the ground like a deadlift. There's a rack pull deadlift. There's not really like a rack pull bent over row that you generally think of as being a different movement from the bent over row. You bend over and you row. That's a bent over row with a barbell. The depth at which you accomplish that is up to your own discretion, generally speaking. The one variation that has a separate name is like the dead stop bent over row, where you place it on the ground, comes to a complete stop, and you row up from there. I was doing those for a while. The close cousin to those being the Pendlay row, where you, not so much on the dead stop part, but it does reach the ground, and then as explosively as possible coming up, back down, coming up. I was pursuing those as well, so I'd say I was doing more of a Pendlay row than a bent over row for a good portion of time. It was contributing a lot to spinal erector and quadratus lumborum inflammation to an unnecessary degree. So I, like I just said, started putting down the 25s. Okay, well, if it's hurting at that depth, let's bring it up just a little bit. Let's see if that helps. It did, but I'm still getting discomfort. Okay, well, let's put 2 25s down. It helps, but I was still getting discomfort. What I found, in short, from this training session is the optimal range for me, as far as depth, is exactly where my arms are truly at full length, right? So if I'm bent over, I have reached full arm length, row up from there. But what I had been doing is going even deeper than where my full arm length would be, and this ends up putting the stressors lower on the back, whereas they could be more in the middle of the back, which is more optimal, truth be told. I'm trying to train my lats. I'm not trying to train directly the muscles of the lower back that aren't really meant to go through flexion extension, right? In regards to something like the deadlift or the bent over row. I'm not trying to do back extensions on a machine. I'm not trying to flex forward and come out of that position. I'm looking for my back to be a solid, strict entity that doesn't move. What's moving are my lat muscles contracting my shoulder blades and scapula together. That is their core functionality in range of motion. So anything that's not that is involving a muscle that is not the main target muscle unnecessarily, and that can lead to injury. So I'm trying to avoid that. So in short, I decided to take a position with bent over row where I am completely at arm's length, bent over, but not so deep that I go any further than that. And that really ends up looking like I'm more like 5 to 6 inches off the floor. about where shin level deadlift would end up putting me as well. Right about that range where I need the most work anyways. It's perfect. So I'm going to keep optimizing those. I might use objects to set myself up on to continue to do the dead stop. I think that is definitely helpful. Or I might just bend over into that precise position, kind of holding a Romanian deadlift of sorts. A Romanian deadlift stance of sorts, and then rowing from there. So things to still continue to be learned about even such a primary movement as the bent over row. It's so primary, it's worth putting in the work and the time to make it as optimized as possible. That's truly what I believe about it at this point. Too valuable to do away with, but it can have its downsides. Moving along, close grip pull down. I've been doing these the last couple of weeks as my third movement, my tertiary movement. Just flipped it up to be more of a strength movement here. I was on this day enjoying the depth, getting it so close to my chest, and then allowing a pause, doing so explosively. Moved what's some pretty good weights for me on this day with that. Normally at this point I would move on to a hammer grip pull up with weights added. I probably will this next week, but for this day I wanted a little bit lower overall impact of the close grip pull downs. Moved on to machine low rows. The theme in general for this day was that the bent over rows were good, but they took a lot out of me, and I was having a bit of inflammation. Like I said, with that learning curve of finding out exactly what I needed to do. So I took these two, not easier as far as my RPE output, but I chose exercises that had a higher stimulus to fatigue ratio, right? Better stimulus, less fatigue. So I found these to do that very effectively. The machine low rows, basically it's like the form of what I would do for a dumbbell row, but I get to do them both at the same time. It's a machine where your hands are individual from each other, unilateral. And one that I really like. I like the increase in tension all the way up to the top and get really good holds at the top. Feels like a lot of the lat benefits of the bent over row without the extra spinal erector, quadratus, lumbar, and loads that you would find with actually bending over. Finally, a little bit more grip work and a little bit of direct trap work with the shrug and hold combos I like to do right now. Again, like what we saw on Monday with the rack deadlifts, doing something that's as direct carryover to deadlifts as possible. Double overhand, bar is in front of my body, doing holds out away from my legs as much as possible so I don't help myself, and holding a shrugged position. Do that for a couple of sets. Then I drop down to 225 so that I could just shrug out some working shrug reps there. I never have complaints about pull day other than inflammation of my lower back. Absolutely love them. I like the core of having about 3 or 4 movements. Works very, very well for me right now. All right, moving on to squat day. All right, here we are at the squat day. Now, this is going to be another one that I'm going to primarily focus on the main movement, the squat, talk about what is important about the decisions I'm making around it, and then the rest kind of is intended to be accessory work to it, so it's going to get an accessory amount of time. Squats, once again, that everyday max coming back here with a 1x1 at 495. There's another thought to add very briefly to the everyday max concept, and I'll do an entirely different video on this at some point, I am sure, and a muscle moment focused on this, but with the everyday max, I also believe that the more instances that I get where I am performing repetitions above, let's say above 90%, let's say 92.5%, right? Close to 95 or up, right? The more instances of that I'm able to accomplish and recover from, the better, period. Just period, it's going to be better. If I could recover from doing 5 sets of 495 singles here and then just do some high rep work and get out of the gym and that would, check all the boxes I needed to, boy, I would do that. I definitely would. Because that carryover would be immense. That would be perfect. Excellent carryover. but it's just so unsustainable. I just can't do that week in and week out, week in and week out. It's a very deteriorating thing to do over and over. And the important point is, my goal is not to deteriorate myself. It is to apply stimuli that my body then has to come back stronger than ever before to overcome. So I apply stimuli, I adapt to the stimulus, and I get better. If I interrupt that chain by applying the stimuli, I'm recovering. Wait, nope, applying new stimulus. Well, I'm trying to recover. Wait, nope, applying new stimulus. It just keeps going downhill from there. So the everyday max has got to be in there, but in there not so often that it is taking away from my overall ability to perform. It needs to help me in the long run. On the flip side of that, I believe that strength is a spectrum, and as a result, we can't fully expect 5 rep or repetition maximums to optimally carry over to singles, so the performing of singles becomes incredibly important. And also, in a lot of forms that are not conjugate training, and not like the Shiko style of weightlifting training where you're doing near maximal effort work on a pretty regular basis, if you're not doing those things, oftentimes, I think with a Western linear periodization kind of program, where you really only do singles maybe once other than your peak, your peak at a meet kind of thing, how many times have you actually done a weight? In my case, how many times have I squatted over 500 pounds, over 495? If I keep testing for singles, but all my other training only brings me up to 90% of my 1 rep max, how often do I actually work in that 95 to 100? Mostly just on my attempts. Really, it's really only on my warm-up attempts as I'm going for that new max that I'm even getting in that realm, right? In that spectrum, in that range. So the more instances that I have where I'm pushing the boundary of a weight that I haven't touched that many times, it gets more times under my belt that I've felt 495. I've realistically squatted 495 or more maybe 6 times. Really. Maybe 6 times. Now I've gone up to 535 as the heaviest. I've done one at 515, 505, and a couple of warm-up 495s on my way to a new one. But now, because of this, I can add another 3 or 4 times that I have squatted 495 before I even approach getting to that new max peaking attempt, right? More instances where my body is like, oh, we own this weight now. We know this weight. This is familiar to us. This is not uncharted territory. Yeah, 495. I know what this feels like. Some days it feels heavier than others, sure. But my body knows what to expect when I put that weight on my back. It's certainly heavy, but now, after I've done it a bunch of times with consistency, I will own it. I will have that weight. That's just another thought of why I do everyday maxes now. Moving forward, 5 reps with 415. That's a new best. I have not accomplished anything better than that previously for 5 reps, so that was really solid. And about an RPE of 9. I believe that I could have accomplished another rep there if I had to. So that's a great place to be. Then a 3x5 with 375, backing down the weight by about 40 pounds, 10% dish, 10% back off, and keep hitting those 5s. That was an excellent work. That core work right there, 2 really big exhibitions of strength, and then 3 sets that were holding my ground. Progressively each one got harder. But if we look at it this way, it kind of goes like RPE of 8 to 9-ish for a single, RPE of 9-ish for 5, and then the first set of 3x5 is probably backs us down to like an RPE of 8, but then it accumulates. The next one's more like 8.5, and then that last one I like to be at around an RPE of 9. Moving down, we have deficit deadlifts. Love, love, love the heck out of these. They're just a phenomenal movement for helping the deadlift, no questions asked. They get my back in a better position where I'm more upright, a little bit more engagement of the quadriceps at the very bottom of the movement,
And the glute contractions are wonderful on these, no question. So I feel very engaged and very powerful on deficit deadlifts. 405 compared to my current deadlift of 585 is, 70%. It's not a ridiculously heavy deadlift. I'm capable of controlling that weight, but again, I put it in an environment that makes it a little more difficult. At the very bottom there, I'm digging out of the hole. It's deeper than any regular deadlift would be, so there's that instance of extra difficulty that just makes it so worth doing. And then did hanging leg raises, 3 sets, 50 total reps, just some extra ab work on there. The only criticism I have for myself in this, on paper, in looking at this, it looks really good. It looks like I really accomplished some good things. It's short, it's sweet, and to the point. Well, it's certainly not short. It took a long time, but the diversity is quite simple. It's pretty straightforward, just 3 movements, 2 compounds, and an ab. But the one criticism I have is that my back had become incredibly inflamed by the end of the deficit deadlifts. I was experiencing that by the end of squats, and it just carried over into the deficits. Every instance in which I was actually doing the movement felt good. During the movement, I did not have any pain or discomfort associated with doing it. It's always after the movement is over, the inflammation seems to rush into that area of my lower back, the quadratus lumborum, just swells up a good deal. And that was the tightest it has felt in months. Easily in months of training, that was the tightest it has been. Had to lay on the floor for a minute, and it was even, the car ride home afterwards was uncomfortable. Had to recline my seat back just to alleviate some of the tension there. I have some theorems about that I'm trying to work out. I wish that I could walk away from that and say, I know exactly how to fix this problem. It won't happen again. I don't exactly know how. I could have diversified more, but squats and deadlifts and close variations thereof are so important to what I'm doing right now, strength-wise. I could have done, less sets on here and done some more leg curls or something, but the carryover just isn't there as directly. So I'm trying to work out some things with that. I think one of the things that I can do a better job of is getting an alleviation of tension. If I'm getting that tension in the moment on the back end, definitely doing some stretching of the lower back. But I think also a contributing factor is tightness of my upper quads and the insertion thereof into my pelvic region. So some of the hip flexors and extensors all the way around my hip girdle are really freaking tight. I think getting an alleviation of tension on that front end will help the back end to feel more supported and to be able to relax a little bit. So doing stretching in that regard every single day, as well as preemptively the day of, before I go into the gym, is going to assist in that, no question. Moving on to the final day. In our final training day of the week, bench press, done on Saturday. Moving right into it, final instance of the everyday max that we're throwing in here. 430 pounds has never moved so easily. That was an excellent way to start things off. And not a lot to report in that regard. I was able to get very, very tight. A very effective arch. There's some little factors, some little tweaks in there about my bench press form that just aren't best presented in this format. I'll definitely do a video on my bench press format at some point, but just not right now on my bench form. 5 reps with 395 pounds was my other strength instance there, which went very, very well. Very pleased with that performance. And then backing off in weight, but again, back down to like an RPE of 8, and then letting it accumulate, 365 for 3 static sets of 5 there. Moved into a rack bench press, which I have not previously done anything with. That was another new instance. Really liked it. That's why I have 335 on the first set. Didn't know exactly what to expect weight-wise, but that was very easy, so we moved it up to 365 to complete the other 3 sets for a total of 4x5. I'll get into more detail about that one in the future as well, but briefly now on the rack bench press, have it at a height that is maybe an inch away from my chest, trying to get it really, really close, but coming to a complete and utter stop onto those racks. Dead stop, no stretch reflex allowed, a good pause to it. And then the hardship of it is that it makes you have to figure out your exact optimal angle to come up off the chest from. So how much am I able to tuck? How low am I able to be? Versus how high do I need to be to get that angle and get it going off the chest. Really love what it's doing for that in regards to my kind of like a form check, if you would. And just carrying things on a little bit further from where the bench press was. Great combination. Did a little bit of dumbbell curls to let myself clear out the lactic acid a little bit so I was fresher. And then it did an archless bench press, 315 for 13 reps. Super, not easy. I definitely went close to failure on that one, but definitely a weight that is so easily in my control now. Feels nice to have that firmly in my grasp. Then just did some quick crossovers at the end to finish things off, some cable crossovers. It was an excellent, very rewarding workout. I will continue to do the rack presses for sure. I like them much better than floor presses, presently speaking. Alrighty, that wraps up this training week. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I hope that it was informative to you. I know this one also ran a good deal long, but there's a lot to share about the customizations I've made on my training program here. So even as I learn, I hope you're able to learn along the way. Hope you have a blessed day.